1. Bear confesses to D.S. Walsh. In a police interview, Bear tells D.S. Walsh that he killed Ray. Walsh can see he's confused and questions him gently over what happened. Bear finds it hard to recall the details, but he insists he was alone the whole time. He says it was an accident, but then a slip of the tongue alerts Walsh there is more to it. As she continues to question him, he gets more and more agitated as he insists he acted on his own. Will Walsh believe him? 2. Bear makes it worse for Moira. Walsh soon changes the subject to Moira. Bear reveals Cain pressured him into telling the police Moira had nothing to do with it, and he never saw her at Celia's farm. Has Bear made things worse for Moira instead of better? 3. Paddy blames himself. Marlon rushes to support Paddy, who thinks he has made this whole mess worse. He has convinced him Bear and Dylan are going to prison. Marlon tries to give him hope that it will be recognized as self-defense, but it's not looking good. 4. Walsh points the finger at Paddy in Emmerdale spoilers. When Bear is questioned further, he becomes even more confused. Paddy insists Bear is telling the truth, but his constant interruptions lead Walsh to suspect Paddy was involved in the murder. Walsh refuses to believe Bear moved the body alone. Paddy spirals further when he and Dylan are called back to the station for questioning. 5. Bear is charged. Bear is eventually charged with manslaughter. His lawyer reminds Paddy he has a good chance as he acted in self-defense. However, as Paddy encourages Bear, Bear is determined to do the honorable thing and plead guilty. Can they change his mind? 6. Cain tries to comfort Moira. Now Bear has confessed to killing Ray. Cain is hopeful this will prove Moira's innocence. He visits Moira and tells her about the confession, and Moira thinks he's clutching at straws. The next day she is angry to find Cain pressured Bear, and that Bear's statement hasn't helped her case. Is there any hope for Moira? 7. Cain continues to lash out. Moira wants Cain to share what is bothering him as she can see he's stressed. But he continues to keep his counts a secret. When he gets home to find Joe on the sofa, Cain goes mad. But Matty says he let Joe in, and it's time they stop fighting and unite to help Moira. Cain is near breaking point, but will he listen? 8. Ruby confesses to Cain. Feeling overwhelmed by guilt, Ruby tells Cain she called the police over the bodies. Blindsided, Cain is fuming and thinks Ruby and Caleb deliberately threw Moira under the bus. As he furiously orders them to leave, Sarah urges him to stop pushing people away who want to help him. Will Cain listen? 9. Arthur quits. Lazy Arthur is too busy on his phone to serve customers, and Gabby tells him off. There's a huge row, and Arthur quits his job. Laurel is at a loss as Arthur is clearly in a bad way. But can she help him? 10. Arthur plans to leave. Laurel discovers Arthur searching for his passport, and he tells her he's moving to Australia. She asks how he's going to get the money, and then finds a huge amount of cash in an envelope. Arthur admits it was in the bag with Ray's drugs. He threatens to tell people that she hit him if she tries to stop him using it, and Laurel breaks down. 11. Laurel makes a decision. When things have calmed down, Arthur apologizes. He begs his mum to let him use the money to travel. However, later on, Laurel overhears Marlon and Rona discussing their huge debt. She soon makes a decision about exactly what needs to be done with the money. 12. Dawn has news for Joe. Dawn tells Joe she thinks she might be pregnant. Is this good news for him? How will he react? 13. Mandy returns. Mandy is back unexpectedly, but she arrives to chaos as Paddy leaves with the police. 14. Ross and Commie play matchmaker in Emmerdale spoilers. Realizing there is an attraction between Lewis and Vinny, Ross and Commie decide they will get them together. Will it work? 15. The DeLorean arrives in town. Manpreet, Commie and Vinny are stunned to see the DeLorean parked in the village outside the shop. However, disaster soon strikes when it's taken for a joy ride. Emmerdale is heading into one of its most emotionally charged weeks, yet as confessions, accusations, and long-buried secrets threaten to destroy lives across the village. With Bear facing police questioning over Ray's death, Moira's freedom hanging by a thread, Cain spiraling under the weight of guilt and secrecy, and Arthur making a shocking decision that could change everything, the fallout is only just beginning. As tensions rise, loyalties are tested, and the truth proves harder to uncover than anyone imagined. Bear confesses to D.S. Walsh. At the police station, Bear sits opposite D.S. Walsh, visibly shaken and struggling to focus. His hands tremble as he finally admits what everyone has feared. He tells her he killed Ray. Walsh immediately senses something isn't right. Bear appears confused, his memory fractured, his version of events hazy at best. As she gently presses him for details, Bear Bear insists repeatedly that it was an accident and that he was alone the entire time. But then comes a slip. A poorly chosen phrase. A hesitation that lasts just a moment too long. Walsh clocks it instantly. There's more to this story than Bear is letting on. As the questioning continues, Bear becomes increasingly agitated, raising his voice as he insists, almost desperately, that no one else was involved. The harder Walsh pushes, the more Bear doubles down. But Walsh isn't convinced. Not for a second. Bear makes things worse for Moira. Sensing a shift in Bear's demeanor, Walsh changes tack and brings Moira into the conversation. Bear stiffens immediately. Under questioning, he reveals that Cain pressured him to tell police that Moira had nothing to do with Ray's death, that he never saw her anywhere near Celia's farm. Walsh notes everything. What Bear doesn't realize is that his attempt to protect Moira may have done the exact opposite. His inconsistencies and obvious coaching only deepen police suspicion. Instead of clearing Moira's name, Bear may have sealed her fate. Paddy is consumed by guilt. Back in the village, Paddy is barely holding it together. Marlon finds him spiraling, convinced that everything he's touched has turned toxic. Paddy is certain that he, Bear and Dylan are all headed for prison. Marlon tries to steady him, urging him to hold onto the possibility of self-defense. Ray was dangerous. Circumstances matter. But Paddy can't hear it. The weight of guilt presses down on him, and the fear in his eyes tells Marlon this is far from over. Walsh turns her suspicion on Paddy. Back at the station, Bear's confusion worsens. His timeline doesn't add up, his details blur together, and his agitation only fuels Walsh's suspicions. Paddy keeps interrupting, insisting Bear is telling the truth. That's when Walsh's attention shifts. Why is Paddy so invested? Why is he so desperate to control the narrative? Walsh begins to suspect Paddy wasn't just a bystander. When she states outright that she doesn't believe Bear could have moved the body alone, Paddy's composure shatters. His panic is impossible to miss. When both Paddy and Dylan are called back in for further questioning, Paddy spirals completely. Bear is charged. Eventually, the hammer falls. Bear is charged with manslaughter. His lawyer reassures Paddy that Bear has a strong case, self-defense, confusion, mitigating circumstances. There is hope. But Bear isn't listening. Consumed by guilt and convinced it's the honorable thing to do, Bear announces he intends to plead guilty. Paddy is horrified. If Bear goes through with it, the consequences could be devastating. Not just for Bear, but for Moira too. Can anyone stop him before it's too late? Cain tries to comfort Moira, and fails. Cain believes Bear's confession might finally clear Moira's name. He visits her, telling her the news with forced optimism. Moira isn't convinced. She sees it for what it is, desperation. The next day, her fragile hope shatters when she learns Cain pressured Bear into making the statement. Furious, Moira accuses Cain of meddling and making everything worse. Bear's confession hasn't helped her case at all. Moira is running out of time and faith. Cain continues to lash out. Moira can see Cain is cracking. She urges him to talk, sensing there's more behind his anger. But Cain refuses, still keeping his cancer diagnosis secret. When he returns home to find Joe lounging on the sofa, Cain explodes. His fury is raw and frightening. Matty steps in, revealing he let Joe in, and tells Cain it's time to stop fighting everyone and focus on helping Moira. Cain is close to breaking. Will he finally listen? Ruby drops a bombshell. Overwhelmed with guilt, Ruby makes a devastating confession to Cain. She admits she called the police about the bodies. Cain is blindsided. He immediately assumes Ruby and Caleb deliberately sacrificed Moira to save themselves. Furious, he orders them out of his life. Sarah intervenes, pleading with Cain to stop pushing away people who want to help him. Cain hesitates. For the first time, doubt creeps in. Arthur quits his job. Elsewhere, Arthur's behavior raises alarm bells. Glued to his phone and ignoring customers, he sparks a blazing row with Gabby and quits his job on the spot. Laurel is deeply worried. Arthur is clearly struggling, withdrawn and erratic. But she has no idea just how bad things are. Arthur plans to leave the country. Laurel's fears escalate when she finds Arthur searching for his passport. He tells her he's moving to Australia. When she asks how he plans to pay for it, she discovers a large envelope stuffed with cash. Arthur admits the truth. The money came from Ray's drug bag. When Laurel tries to stop him, Arthur threatens to tell people she hit him. Laurel breaks down, devastated and trapped. Laurel makes a heartbreaking decision. After Arthur apologizes, he begs Laurel to let him use the money to escape and start over. She's torn. But later, Laurel overhears Marlon and Rona discussing their crippling debt. That's when clarity hits. Laurel makes a decision that could save one family, but destroy her relationship with her son forever. Dawn drops shocking news on Joe. Dawn sits Joe down and reveals she thinks she might be pregnant. Joe is stunned. Is this a new beginning, or another complication in an already fractured family? Mandy returns to chaos. Just as the village reaches boiling point, Mandy returns unexpectedly. But there's no joyful reunion. She arrives to find Paddy being taken away by the police. The shock on her face says it all. Nothing is the same anymore. Ross and Commie play matchmaker. Amid the darkness, Ross and Commie decide to inject some romance into village life. Sensing a spark between Lewis and Vinny, they plot to bring the two together. But is meddling ever that simple in Emmerdale? The DeLorean brings disaster. Finally, Manpreet, Commie and Vinny are stunned when a DeLorean appears outside the shop. The novelty quickly turns to disaster when it's taken for a reckless joy ride, proving that in Emmerdale, even light-hearted moments never stay that way for long.